For 3 weeks leading up to the false flag staging, both WTC 1 and 2 had strange shutdowns for maintenance. This was reported by many survivors. I was there 2 weeks before the disaster, and my friend, who lived 2 blocks away, almost didn't want to take me upstairs to the viewing deck because of the very long lines that he said were extremely weird for a weekday. In retrospect, I wonder if it was due to those security shutdowns. During those shutdowns is when we believe the concrete crushing thermite and steel cutting thermite explosives were put into place. Thermite has some particularly curious properties. It can cut through steel, like a hot knife through butter, and the byproducts of the explosion are simple dust and a ton of gray smoke. Remember all of the replays of that day, and try hard to remember the most prominent visual. After the buildings came down, tons of dust and gray smoke. There is one picture from the debris pile that shows an I-beam angle cut, precisely how the demolition experts cut vertical beams in a controlled demolition. Wonder why they quickly put up that huge fence around the pile, and how quickly they disposed of the evidence. More pictures of those I-beams cut, and the running molten metal, another specific property of thermite steel cutting explosives, would have provided too many smoking guns to ignore. This angled cut I-beam is the smoking gun of the false flag operation of September 11, 2001. Dialogue here returns to Operation Northwoods, because they used the same plane switch that was detailed there. It is very troubling to me that there is no mention, either there or here, of what happened to the civilians. I cannot imagine myself there are many evil enough to kill innocent civilians in cold blood face to face, but if they would sacrifice 3,000 to 6,000, what is another couple hundred? The Cleveland airport is where they believe 2 of the planes ended up. One group went through the NASA terminal and simply disappeared from existence. I fully believe that the Pentagon's internal damage was also staged to look more like their cover story. I only say this because one of our posters here had a boss work within the building with some testimony, and I'm not sure a few sprinkled body parts would be far from these evil fellows' abilities and plans. I am sorry, Dan and DC, for bringing this up again and again. Believe me when I say it is not pleasant for me to keep looking at it, but I cannot look away, despite the howls of protest. There are pictures of men standing around a war game model of the building with a plane poked through it, just as it happened in real life. These pictures were taken well before 2001. The vehicle that hit it performed a maneuver that could have easily been done by a fighter plane, but not a passenger. Either way, it is interesting, because according to their story, the supposed pilot of this supposedly hijacked plane was unable to even fly a Cessna 172 with fixed gear, one of the easiest planes to fly. I had my entire experience as a pilot in the Cessna 172 fixed gear plane. With a client of mine who was very liability-minded, I learned how to land and take off at will or run. The first landing was harrowing. I froze at the yoke, and he had to yell at me to keep us from auguring into the tarmac. Second one was the smoothest landing he said he's ever felt in that craft. He made me do it a few more times, because he couldn't believe how smooth I was. It was pretty easy to fly, and I'd never had my hands on the controls of a plane ever before in my life. My flying was at least 5 years before I even saw my first flight simulator program on a home computer, but more likely 10. If Unjor couldn't pilot that little four-seater, there is no way he could perform a 270-degree downward spiral tight around then hit the Pentagon precisely where the months-old rebuilding project had been performed. What do you think the odds are of that? It sure as hell isn't simply 1 in 5. How do you think he knew where to hit? You'd think that once he saw the second most recognizable building in the world, he'd make a fucking beeline for it. Tell me how far off you really think I am in this analysis, please, 'cause now I'm getting angry over the whole thing. I've never assembled this story, because it completely overwhelms me to consider it all. I pray even now that somehow I get the strength and clarity to finish the story, although, yeah, I know, fuck it, I'm done. I am now in the same overstressed mode I used to find myself every Sunday at the Conspiracy Theory Brew and View, and I go to such a dark place it takes days to recover. Thanks. Research it yourself, and be prepared for the bulk of evidence to point away from the hoax of an explanation put forth by those within our government who performed this dirty deed. The man who chaired the committee was an insider, who directed the show away from any actual truth leaking out. How much better to contain their secrets, and the same exact damn thing they did back in the early 60s with the JFK murder. I'm done.